What if the oldest, most unbelievable stories that we've been told for thousands of years, the great floods, the battles in the sky, what if they weren't just fairy tales?
Hmm.
What if they were actually precise, detailed disaster reports? Like a forgotten archive meant to save our lives today.
It's a huge shift in how you think about it, right?
Yeah.
We have this tendency to just dismiss ancient stories as, primitive fiction,
Right, just entertainment.
just entertainment. But when you start applying modern geology, modern climate science
Yeah.
to these accounts, the amount of critical life-saving information they hold it's just invaluable.
Exactly. We're talking about stories we might have just brushed off as like total exaggeration. And now scientists are saying, hang on, wait a second. The details line up perfectly with these catastrophic events in the deep past.
And that brings us right to our mission for this deep dive. We are exploring the powerful and really growing field of geomythology.
Geomythology.
Yeah. It was pioneered by a geologist named Dorothy Vitaliano. And it's the study of how these massive geological events, we're talking huge floods, cosmic impacts, volcanic eruptions, how they're not just remembered, but meticulously encoded into myths and oral traditions that have survived for millennia.
So we're looking for the geological fingerprints inside human culture.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this with some real-world examples. Things that stop feeling like a history lesson and start feeling like an urgent weather forecast. We have to start in the U.S. Pacific Northwest.
Absolutely. We're looking at the Cascadia Subduction Zone. It's a 680-mile fault line that runs along the Oregon and Washington coasts.
And today, scientists know it's a huge threat.
Oh, massive threat. It's capable of generating magnitude 9 megaquakes, devastating tsunamis. But the problem is our modern written record is just too short to really understand the history there.
So how on earth did they figure out the timetable for past disasters?
Well, they turned to the only deep history that was available, the local Native American stories. A geologist with the USGS, Brian Atwater, he found these tales describing entire villages just being washed away.
Wow.
And specific warnings about shaking boulders, they call them ayahos, and legends of these epic battles between whales and thunderbirds.
Which are symbols for...
For massive seismic activity, the earth shaking and the sea rising. And these oral accounts were a primary influence on his fieldwork.
That is staggering. To think that a crucial historical archive wasn't on paper but was carried verbally for centuries.
And so the science follows the story. The team investigates the coastline. They find these drowned forests, these ghost forests of dead trees that were suddenly swamped by salt water.
And that gives them a rough date.
A rough date, yeah.
Yeah.
They estimated a huge quake and tsunami hit somewhere between 1680 and 1720.
But they needed to get more precise.
Exactly. That respect for the precision in the oral history pushed them to find a hard date. So first, tree ring data narrowed it down to 1699 or 1700. But the final confirmation, the real smoking gun, came from working with Japanese colleagues.
Across the entire Pacific Ocean.
Across the ocean. Japanese historians, they're reviewing their records, and they find documents about an orphan tsunami.
An orphan tsunami, what does that mean?
It means a massive wave that wasn't linked to any local earthquake, it just showed up. And it struck Japan on January 27th, 1700.
My gosh. So that was the wave from the Cascadia quake.
That was it.
Yeah.
That cross-referenced evidence, which was rooted in folklore, it allowed them to date the Cascadia megaquake precisely, a Richter scale 9 event.
And the really scary part here is that scientists believe these things happen every 200 to 1,000 years. Which means the region may be due one soon. That is the definition of an urgent warning from the past.
And the Cascadia story, it shows the power of deep history. But what about knowledge that saved lives, just 20 years ago? For that, we have to look at the Moken people of Thailand.
The sea gypsies.
Exactly. And their survival during the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami is a perfect example of geomythology in action.
How so?
Their traditional knowledge it saved them. The Moken had this clear, non-negotiable warning passed down through generations.
Okay.
It says that when the tide recedes far and fast, which we now know is a physical precursor to a tsunami, a man-eating wave is coming.
And what's the instruction?
The instruction is simple. Run far and fast. So on December 26, 2004, they saw the sign. They followed the instruction without hesitation, and because of that ancient warning, they survived.
Those stories are literally the difference between life and death. Okay, so that moves us from these sort of regional warnings to maybe the biggest story of all, the universal flood.
The Great Deluge. And what's so fascinating is just how common it is. Flood myths are everywhere, in almost every culture. You have the ancient Sumerian accounts, Atrahasis, the Epic of Gilgamesh, dating back over 4,000 years,
Then you've got the biblical story of Noah, of course.
of course. And the Hindu traditions where the Matsya avatar warns men to build a boat. Countless indigenous North American cultures have their own versions. It's truly universal.
So a lot of scientists have tried to connect these universal stories to one single real geological event to find a physical root for it. And that brings us to the Black Sea Deluge hypothesis.
Right. This theory suggests a very specific mechanism. So after the last glacial period, global sea levels rose about 120 meters.
A huge change.
Enormous. And proponents of this theory argue that the rising Mediterranean Sea eventually just breached the Bosporus Sill. It was a land bridge back then.
And that's what separated the Mediterranean from the Black Sea.
Yes, which at the time was a smaller, isolated freshwater lake. And this breach, they argue, was violent. A catastrophic flood that wiped out any communities on its shores.
That certainly sounds like a deluge, a rapid, world-changing flood. But is the scientific community on board with this?
Far from it. The debate is pretty fierce. Opponents point to evidence suggesting it was a much more gradual process. For instance, there are clues that water was actually flowing out of the Black Sea as late as 15,000 years ago.
The other way around.
The complete opposite direction. And a big review in 2022, it looked at all the evidence and concluded there was, and I'm quoting here, insufficient evidence for a flood scenario.
Wow. And what about the people? The archaeology?
That's the biggest blow to the theory. They found no archaeological evidence of humans evacuating the area. So the thinking now is that the inundation of the Black Sea was probably slow. A long-term process, not one sudden catastrophic event.
So whether or not it was a single violent moment, that cultural memory of rising waters is undeniably there. Okay, let's jump now to an even earlier and maybe more dramatic global event, the Younger Dryas.
The Younger Dryas, or YD, this was a severe, abrupt global cooling that happened around 12,900 years ago. It's often called a polar seesaw, and it's linked to the weakening or even a complete shutdown of the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation.
The AMOC, we hear a lot about that today.
We do. And this climate shift had huge consequences back then. I mean, we're not talking about a small temperature dip.
This changed everything.
It fundamentally changed human existence. Ecosystems just flipped. Tundra replaced forests in what's now New England. Massive drought hit Anatolia. And in the Levant, the severe cold and drought forced hunter-gatherers to shift how they lived, which arguably kickstarted the move to agriculture.
And this climate catastrophe is tied to the very controversial Younger Dryas impact hypothesis.
Yes, the YDIH. Very controversial.
So let's lay it out. What is the core idea? Why is it so debated?
The core idea is that around 12,800 years ago, the Earth flew through the debris stream of a large disintegrating comet. And this series of air bursts and impacts triggered widespread destruction, massive meltwater floods, and ultimately caused the abrupt cooling.
Okay, so a cosmic cause. What's the physical evidence that the proponents point to?
They point to markers in a specific sediment layer, the Younger Dryas boundary. They say they find these synchronous peaks of metallic debris, platinum group elements, and these little iron and silica-rich microspherules in sediment cores from places like Baffin Bay.
And they argue that can only come from an extraterrestrial source.
That's their argument.
Okay, so if the physical markers are there, the platinum, the spherules, why is the scientific consensus so against this? I mean, what's wrong with the theory?
Well, that's the key question. Critics argue that the evidence is often misidentified, or that the results are simply irreproducible. Other labs try to replicate the findings and they just can't. And what's more, mainstream climate science points out that the Younger Dryas looks statistically very similar to many previous abrupt climate shifts, called Dansgaard-Aescher events. So making this one a unique, singular impact event is, let's say, very unlikely. The consensus really leans heavily on the AMOC shutdown as the cause.
So from physical evidence, we shift to the mythological or maybe astronomical interpretation of that period, and that takes us to Göbekli Tepe in southern Anatolia.
An incredible site built around 10,000 BC. And what's so fascinating here is that some researchers think this site was more than just a temple.
What, like an observatory?
Exactly. They suggest these massive carved enclosures were actually space observatories designed to track cosmic events.
And the so-called Rosetta Stone for this theory is Pillar 43, the famous Vulture stone.
Precisely. The researchers pushing this idea see this pillar as a literal date stamp for that Younger Dryas cometary encounter. They date it to 10,950 BC, give or take 250 years.
And how do they get a date from a carving?
They match the animal carvings to star constellations, like an ancient zodiac, and argue the pillar is recording catastrophic encounters with the torrid meteor stream.
But the actual archaeologists, the people digging at the site, they have some pretty serious issues with this idea, right?
Oh, absolutely. The archaeological critique is very pointed. First, the structures may have been roofed, which would make them pretty useless as observatories.
Right.
Second, the monuments were changed a lot over time. Pillars were moved, they were recycled, and that destroys any precision you would need for celestial alignments.
And the carvings themselves, are they really a star map?
That's highly disputed. You have to assume that Neolithic hunters used the exact same constellations as the later Egyptians or Greeks, which is a huge leap. And the iconography is just more complex than a simple date. The headless man on Pillar 43, for instance.
Interpreted as death or extinction?
Right. But he also has a clearly emphasized phallus, which suggests a narrative about fertility, regeneration, not just disaster. The story is more complicated.
So this has been a real deep dive into a high-stakes, scientific detective story. What's the big takeaway here? What does this all mean for us today?
Well, at the end of the day, what this confirms is that these ancient stories, whether we can prove them with geology or not, are a profound testament to our planet's capacity for abrupt, violent change. Geomythology really highlights the incredible long-term memory embedded in human culture.
And the lessons are just frighteningly relevant. The scientific consensus on the Younger Dryas, that it was caused by an AMOC shutdown, that is a chillingly relevant parallel to the climate tipping points we are facing right now.
It is.
Our ancestors are basically warning us that the stable world we take for granted can change in a geological blink of an eye.
And to really hammer home how fast that change can happen, we have to mention one more event from a bit earlier, Meltwater Pulse 1A.
Okay, what was that?
This was a massive global sea level rise event around 14,600 years ago. The major ice sheets in North America, Eurasia, Antarctica all collapsed at nearly the same time.
And the result?
Global sea level rose between 10 and 20 meters.
10 to 20 meters? In how long?
In the span of maybe 5 centuries.
That is unbelievable. That proves that catastrophic rapid change isn't just a theory, it's actual Earth history, witnessed and survived by our ancestors.
It reinforces the entire message of geomythology. When our ancestors told stories about running for high ground, they weren't just inventing fairy tales, they were reporting on events they survived to make sure we had the knowledge to survive them too.
So we have to ask you, which ancient catastrophe, the sudden megaquake, the universal flood, or that cosmic cooling event, which one do you think has the most urgent relevance for us today?
A tough question.
Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button, subscribe for more investigations into our deep past, and share this with anyone who loves a good story. We'll see you on the next dive.